Great. Well, good to see so many people joining us this afternoon for the third part of our webinar mini series on safe system capacity. So just do a little bit of an introduction whilst people are making their way through the lobby and in to join us here. And I'm delighted to see just how many people subscribed for today's webinar. So I think we had well over 150 people registered to be with us this afternoon. Obviously, we always get a little bit of a drop off as things crop up, especially as we're in a bit of a season when there's conferences and things going on as well. I know that's will have detained some, but nonetheless, good to see how many people have joined us for this afternoon. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Dan Campsall. I am the chairman at Agilicis, and I'm going to be facilitating our conversation this afternoon. And just before we start, I want to present a little bit of kind of context around that. This is, as I say, the third webinar in our series. We've already done two, the first of which focused on the results of the survey that we conducted over the summer, looking at safe system capacity, and in particular looking at public sector delivery bodies and what capacity they feel they have to deliver on safe system, and how well equipped they feel they are to implement against that safe system idea. Then the second webinar that we did went beyond the results and started to take a little bit more of a deep dive in a sort of pillar by pillar or component by component approach, and exploring some of the issues that actually it has given rise to. What we wanted to do with this afternoon's webinar, the third and final part in the series, is to explore the question of what does this mean for the profession? What are we understanding about the skills needs, the expertise demand that this places on the profession, and ways in which we might need to grow and adapt and change in order to meet our ambitions to deliver a safe system road network across the UK. So I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by a fantastic panel who are going to engage in that conversation this afternoon, who will need very little introduction to you. But just before I do introduce them, just to give you a couple of highlights from the survey that we put out. 72% of survey respondents said that they had an ambition to develop the capacity of their team in respect of safe system delivery. Just below 70% wanted to focus on how they could embed the safe system approach within their work. And over 50% said that they wanted to undertake safe system training. So there's obviously a significant demand, a significant need that the survey has uncovered in respect of continuing development. And so I'm pleased to say that those who are joining us this afternoon bring a great deal of expertise and experience from professional bodies and academia, and thinking about the ways in which we might equip the profession as we move forward. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Kate, why don't I start with you?
Hello, yes, I'm Head of Discipline in Jacobs for Operational Road Safety. That's all things from road safety audit, safety governance, walking, cycling, horse riding, very diverse work around road safety. So we have a strong interest in the safe system, particularly in respect of design, operations and network management, the kind of cradle to grave aspect, no pun intended, of where the safe system sits and what it can and needs to do.
Fantastic. Great to have you with us, Kate. James, good to have you too. Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Thanks, Dan. I'm James Gibson, Executive Director at Road Safety GB. We're essentially, many of you will know, we're a membership organisation. We've got lots of local authorities that are members, so typically road safety teams, but we also have police and fire and corporate members as well. And I suppose Road Safety GB has got four things probably that people know us for. I'll quickly mention them. It's we have the largest news-based website, so the front face of Road Safety GB is essentially our news website. but we have the Road Safety GB Academy, where we offer training, our national conference, which is next week, so 9th and 10th in Harrogate. And then we also run something called the Knowledge Centre, which is an online portal. And this is, think of it like an online library. And then the other things we do are link with key partners, so Agilysys being one, and we jointly work on joining the dots and the Data Analysts Network. So that's us done.
Great stuff. Thanks, James. Shaun, great to have you with us too. You want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, my name's Shaun. I'm a chief scientist at TRL. Many people will have a perception of TRL as still being part of government. We haven't been part of government for getting on for 30 years now. I always say that because it's surprising how many people still think we are. Yeah, so TRL is a private company, but we're a social enterprise. We're a non-profit distributing consultancy, effectively. And I've worked in road safety for getting on for 2 decades. My main interest, behavioural science and psychology. Really looking forward to today.
Great, thanks, Shaun. And last but not least, Tony, great to have you with us too. So if you'd like to just do a quick introduction, that'd be great.
Hi, Tony Sharp, representing the Institute of Highway Engineers. Our membership is largely made up of technicians, engineers who are operating mostly in the UK, mostly in local government, but also in consultancies servicing the highway sector. And our members are involved in the design, operation and maintenance of highway infra. And similarly to James, we offer training courses for our members and to the industry as a whole. And we run, again, a similar academy, run around training courses. And those courses are a route to membership. And one of those we run is road safety, which currently covers safe system, but probably needs an update to reflect evolving technology. The other thing that we do involve ourselves with is the Joint Board of Moderators, which authorises university degrees, and the JBM has moved forward with sustainability, and I see no reason why we can't over time push forward with an idea of safe system with the universities covering a variety of courses and a variety of disciplines.
Great, thanks, Tony. Yeah, so the survey that we ran over the summer was with the support of many of these organisations, so delighted professional bodies like RSGB, IHE, CIHT put their support behind it in order to get it out across the sector, and many other partners as well, the likes of PACT and RoadSafe, also supporting, because we feel that there's a challenge for us to move forward if we're going to really develop our safe system implementation. Then actually we need the capacity to be able to deliver on that, and that's why we wanted to explore some of the questions that we have. So let me just throw out an initial question to the panel, which is around sort of initial reflections, really thinking about some of the challenges posed by delivering a safe system in the UK. It's been in government documentation for the last 7 years or so, but yeah, in the light of that and what you've seen in terms of survey results, what you think some of the standout priorities might be for us now and in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start if you like. For me, I think this is something you might come back to. It's just how long a change of this magnitude takes to embed. And the two things that really stood out to me are, one, how dominant users are in the responses, and road safety education in particular. So I think it was the most dominant response from LAs, from police forces and from fire and rescue. And there was a lovely word cloud in the middle as well, which again, users and people, that they were really dominant themes. They really stood out. Whereas some of the other pillars, speed in particular, I thought was particularly in the background. And so yeah, for me, it's about getting everyone to really mean it when they say we follow a safe system approach, and know what that means.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we presented was a number of the definitions that we were provided by people when they were given the opportunity, some which were really quite rich in terms of their expression and understanding of the safe system, and others clearly starting to sort of grapple with the concept in quite a rudimentary way. Kate, you're nodding there. You look like you wanted to come in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of this is about leadership. It's about the people who have the ability to take decisions to decide where to spend money and how to spend it, exercising that leadership. There's no point if all the practitioners know what good looks like and the decision makers don't authorise them to do that. So from a national and an individual highway authority, transport body and so on, for me, the critical thing is that the people who are decision makers understand this issue, and my experience is they don't in very many cases, both in political and the non-political roles, offices in authorities, for example, and they understand the interaction on each other. Designers understand the impact on network management. Network managers understand, I always think for me, network management is the management of the built infrastructure. And then operations is the stuff that moves around on the top, the transport, the emergency services, the people moving around to do the network management stuff. And that all of those people are influenced by decisions that are taken, but they're often actually less party to the decisions than they should be.
Just sort of pushing back on that a little bit. I mean, if you were to sort of try and define where you think the knowledge gap or the skills gap is at its greatest, I mean, you've chosen to select the sort of the leadership piece, but how well do you feel we fare as a profession if the leadership was there and the investment was in the right place? Actually, are we suitably ready to kind of move forward and develop in a safe system way?
I don't think we are. I think we know lots of nuggets of good content and good facts, but the joining them up, the S in its system is the integration of all of those things. It's the right physical form of a route, it's the speed limit of the route, it's the use of the route, it's the enforcement, it's the the post-crash response. It's all of those components, and that includes road users knowing what's good for them. How do you arrive safely? Having that intelligent conversation with the public around what you can do to get yourself and your passengers and other people home safely. That sort of total picture, I think we do have knowledge, and there are some really difficult nuts to crack. There are a lot of high collision rate rural single carriageway A roads, tree lined. You can't put a barrier down the middle of the road. You can't physically protect the most brutal hazards. What do we do with those roads? I'm not sure we've got an answer to that yet. And for me, some of the most thorny problems, the roads we look at, there isn't a simple solution. Vehicle technology, I think, will be part of it. And that comes back to the leadership of government decision to implement the general safety regulation in the UK and the vehicle safety standards to go with that.
Yeah. Okay, great. I'm sure those are some themes that we'll keep circling back around to. But other reflections, Jay or Tony?
Well, I just agree with what Kate just said. Is that I think that the industry is fairly deficient in knowledge on this. Engineers by their inclination will try their best and try and pull everything they can out of the box to solve the issue that's put in front of them, but often with the best of intentions won't come up with the correct result first time. And we were lucky at the turn of the century, strange to say the turn of the century, but in 2000, when we had the Tomorrow's Road Safer for Everyone, that pushed us forward when it started saying these are targets that you need to meet, and that starts addressing some of the issues that Kate's talking about leadership, because that started focusing the attentions of senior officers who reflected back onto political leadership, and it was coming down from central government as well. And then that filtered down to the coalface workers who got training and you know, was very much of, you know, see one, do one, teach one, and that permeated the system. But that dealt with the low-hanging fruits, that hackneyed phrase, but it's appropriate on the low-hanging fruits of the crash concentration sites. And I think what Kate's pointed out here is that we're looking at a bigger stretch of road networks here. My hope is that our colleagues in National Highways will be able to help, because when you start moving away from their motorway network, which is quite rightly held up as one of the safest networks in Northern Europe, if not the world, and you then start moving into the A-class roads that are of a lower standard, I think they'd admit that, they've got that big nut to crack, and they're focused on safe system. So let's hope that they can start sharing some of their expertise on that. But, you know, central government doesn't want to be sort of prescriptive, has never wanted to be prescriptive. But the only time we've started to make some headroad on this is when central government has been prescriptive, be it via the 88 legislation, which said to local authorities, you will actually investigate collisions and propose solutions, or whether or not it was via the 2000 Safer Roads that said you will do this. So central government can work at the edges of the soft bits in the early stages, but I hesitate to say that they're going to have to, but I think they're going to have to actually push a little bit harder onto local authorities principally, but equally that will reflect on private development. You know, lots of work is done around new developments that needs to conform, but it's going to have to, they're going to have to push a little harder and say, well, if you want this funding, be it for whatever you're bidding for, then you need to show compliance with safer system. This is how I think they've approached it in Australasia, to actually develop schemes to a certain level of putting them in on ground. You have to show a compliance with safe system.
Right. Yeah, that idea of actually baking it into the system and ensuring that yeah, you can't access the funding, you can't deliver without that. James, come to you, sort of initial reflections from you.
Yeah, I mean, I've just chip in with just a couple of things. Dan, what we're dealing with is something that's quite complicated, and I suppose what we need are people that are experts, but we need people with that overview, and we need that cross-pollination. Almost like, you know, but you'd be familiar with like the changing places idea of education, where you get cyclists to sit in a lorry cab and you get lorry drivers to become cyclists. And again, maybe it's that cross-pollination. We don't all need to be experts in everything, but we need that understanding of it. I think the obvious thing for me as well, with my background of local authorities and being used to sitting in big open plan offices with several hundred people on a floor, you used to be able to, pre-COVID, you used to be able to go and walk across, and you'd go and talk to a particular colleague with that expertise. Clearly, since COVID, there's a lot of benefits with online, like us all being here today without the travel. But certainly what many colleagues I know miss is the learning you get, perhaps by just listening into conversations, you know, and I don't mean eavesdropping, but I just mean the learning opportunities from just hearing what people are talking about. So yeah, so overall, I think there's that. And the other thing that came out last week was around the response rate from educators rather than engineers, and that might have just been just the skew with pushing things on road safety GB or some sort of skew like that. And we also talked about is there a difference between educators and engineers in terms of, you know, perhaps completing the survey. But yeah, that's those points, Dan.
Great, thanks. So something I want to pick up there, but just to say, if you do have questions that you would like to feed in our audience, please do use the Q&A button, which should be in the ribbon of your Microsoft Teams application, and that will allow me to see them and then to feed them into our conversation as we go. So something that James just said there was, sort of back in the halcyon days before, the pandemic, when we were able to walk across the room and talk to people, actually it exposed us to a breadth of expertise and knowledge. And I guess one of the things that I wanted to pick out was thinking about, we talk about road safety professionals as if they're all the same thing, as if there's one sort of brand of road safety professional, but inevitably we're talking about a mixture of managers and engineers and enforcement officers and educationalists and those sorts of things. What actually do we need around the table if we are going to do safe system well? I think one of the questions that I wanted to explore was, are there people who are missing? Have we got the right people in the profession, and are there some gaps actually where we need to start thinking more widely about the kind of skills that it will take to deliver safe system effectively?
I think a glaring need in road safety is for better marketing, and I feel slightly bad about myself for saying that, but marketers who are aligned with the evidence and who can change the public narrative and discourse around road safety from one that is still, no, it's just it's a bit of fun, isn't it, road safety, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I think that's a key one. And also potentially that skill set brings a marketing of what the safe system really is to the people who should be implementing it, to really understand what the underlying philosophy and principles are, because that's the important bit, right? The underlying principles and the vision, that's the bits actually I think we're missing. So when when National Highways or anyone says we implement the safe system, do you really? You say you do, and that's great, and I know that you're bought in, but if you say we implement the safe system and then immediately talk about running a high-speed road network and having to deal with other network benefits, well, you've just undermined the safe system principle. So it's getting that fundamental in place for me that's critical, and I think, dare I say it, marketing can probably help with that.
Well, as a member of the Chartered Institute of Marketing, I'm not going to argue with you, Shaun, but
I know, Dan.
Kate, do you look like you were going to come in there?
I definitely echo that, and I challenged Nick Harris's National Highways Safety Board recently around exactly this, of interacting with humans, not in an infantilizing way, infantilizing way, you know what I mean, infantilizing. It's too easy to do the kind of preachy, naggy, whiny, just go away and stop whining, rather than actually do something more effective, more playful. More talk about gamification of messaging. I think is quite interesting. What is it that changes behaviour? My challenge to his board was 20 years ago, we made a catastrophic mistake of doing a brilliant thing, national rollout of speed camera enforcement, and using the money gained to run those operations, not in the way the public thought that the money was used. And we got astonishing results from that, which we're still yielding the benefits from. But we didn't tell the public what we were doing. And by the time we were on the back foot, we could never get off it again. 10 years later, a similarly innovative program around motorway management, use of technology, same again, didn't really tell the public what we were doing and why. Now they think it's all about saving money regardless of safety, when actually it's the opposite. But you'll never get off the back foot. And then my challenge to them was, there's a third one, which is the combination of zero carbon and zero casualty, safe system needs a similarly difficult conversation. The public are dissonant. They simultaneously want safe roads and to get there as quickly as possible. They say motorways are dangerous if we remove the hard shoulder, yet they drive on them with no fuel and bald tyres. We're the problem. We, the public, are the problem. And having that engagement in an intelligent way by people who are experts in conveying those messages, for me, is critical. I don't think we've done it. There's some better movements more recently, but there's a huge gap, not just National Highways, but all authorities. But bluntly, they've got the budget and they've got the profile to do that.
If I can just jump in, because I feel a burning need to pick up on that point Kate, about the public being the problem. You're right in a way, but let's remember that the safe system predicts and knows that we're the problem and is designed to stop us doing silly things that will kill us and cause serious injury. So, you know, on the one hand, the safe system says, well, people will make mistakes, but so many people focus too much on the, well, let's just stop people, you know, enforce people's mistakes and stop them making them. Well, you can't do that, because the whole point is, you know, they're going to make mistakes in the first place. And it's about designing the wider system to be resilient to that, not just.
I agree. I didn't mean making mistakes as in an error causing collision. I meant, for example, choosing to drive on a motorway with near fuel, choosing not to check your tyres, choosing 76% of stops on motorways are illegal discretionary stops. That's the stuff is utterly avoidable. That's the problem thing, not the making a mistake lane changing. That we protect people from that. I
think the poor decisions is part of the mistakes that the safe system would predict. But I mean, that's a discussion for another time, perhaps, but it's an important one.
I think it's a hugely important one, and that's why I'm happy to let it run for a bit, because I think it is, you know, in a number of the conversations that I've had, you know, with sort of various proponents of the safe system, I think what we really mean by safe road use within that kind of component, I think is actually up for grabs. And I think we've had too narrow a view on what it means to configure the system so that it accommodates that human frailty as well as fragility.
Sorry, Dan, if you let it run for one more moment, then. So the example I keep using with people is how we think about suicide. So we take a set of road users who are intending to, by definition, cause harm on the road network deliberately, and we do everything we can to protect that population. And then we look at people who choose to drive with bold tyres or speed, and we say, oh, well, you should just behave better. And it just doesn't make any sense. We should be applying that same reasoning to the entire group of people using the roads, in my opinion.
One area which I think we need to gain some ground back with is police enforcement. You know, when I first started riding motorbikes, don't shoot me, but when I first started riding motorbikes, which is how I got into road safety, you know, there was a huge motorcycle wing in our area and a huge traffic wing. Then, you know, the Home Office made it known that traffic wasn't a measurable element, and all of a sudden, chief constables, not unnaturally, started looking at the cost of these quite powerful, well-equipped cars with these extremely well-trained drivers and co-drivers, and started making cuts. One element I don't see featuring as strong as perhaps it should do in the safe system is enforcement. You know, Kate quite rightly pointed out how people make chronic errors of judgment, sometimes not even errors of judgment. It's, you know, overall they are criminal in how they behave, be it speeding, be it driving a vehicle that's defective, etc., etc. In the old days, one hopes that sooner or later traffic would come across them, and traffic would bring the full weight down on them, up to and including removing said vehicle from their possession. Perhaps that's an element that needs pointing out from our police colleagues with a safe system, that, you know, they need to try and gain back some of the underinvestment in traffic over the years, not just the lads that go out and investigate serious and fatal injuries, because, you know, nobody could ask more of them than they carry out, but it's the overall element of traffic. If nothing else, it puts you know, a visible presence on the street, which may have a benefit of deterrence for the type of driver that Kate's highlighted.
There's a couple of rabbit holes here that I think it'd be quite easy to disappear down, and I, for one, would happily disappear down them. Certainly the conversation about what we did with speed enforcement and the role of enforcement and perceived behavioural control, I'm sure, is one that we could go on at some length with this gathered group, but I wonder whether we ought to sort of just branch out a little bit. And I guess one of the things, you know, in talking about, are there people who aren't sort of currently around the table, or you know, sort of aren't operating within the profession? What would it take to make the profession kind of more appealing for us to actually invite in those who could make a difference in terms of our delivery of the safe system, whether they are you know, working in advertising, marketing and public affairs, or whether they are working in technology and data science and those sorts of things? Because it feels to me like actually there's a lot more room for us to bring a wider portfolio of skills to bear that would help us to both understand safe system more effectively and to come up with more appropriate measures that would enable us to deliver a safe system. So I just wonder what your thoughts are on the kind of workforce element.
Maybe there's a role there, Dan, for sort of stakeholder exchange, or you know, plenty of authorities run things like graduate schemes, which are brilliant because a graduate will come in and then get a taster in various aspects of a local authority. So that might have a 2-month or 3-month placement, and then they'll rotate round and soak up all of that. And part of it is great for them, because what it then allows them to do is to see which aspect they like, and then they can narrow their you know, their work down to that, and that's where they go off. But it does benefit the local authority more broadly, because it gets you thinking about how you impart that knowledge. So I suppose it's that you're getting that overview, but then you want to narrow things down. Perhaps comes back to that sort of changing places, doesn't it? And maybe there's a role, you know, for us all to do that, and to showcase a bit more what we do, and try and have that exchange somehow. I'm not quite sure how we do it, and I pick up on what Shaun said about things taking a long time, and you're not going to achieve all this, you know, really quickly. But yeah, but it isn't necessarily about, you know, that speedboat approach. It's about, you know, let's not go for the oil tanker, but somewhere in between, where we just, you know, where we're gonna have a vision, but hopefully we can get there without it being a, you know, a really long time.
I think that's a great idea, James. I really do. Is that because, you know, a number of local authorities, a number of private consultancies will often have students in from universities on a year's block release, but the tendency is to push them towards the hard engineering element. It's to push them towards structures or highway engineering elements. I think that's a great idea, is to actually try pushing them into, dare one say, what little road safety teams still remain in local authorities, because that's an element I think that needs exploring. Is that a number of teams have been decimated over the years, again, because that comes down possibly to what Kate was saying about the leadership from the politicians and the senior management. I don't think they necessarily acknowledge what the road safety teams can bring. Another element I think we need to bear in mind is that, of course, public health was moved into the local authorities. What was it, about 5 years ago? I don't think it's ever really found its feet within local government, particularly within the highways sector. I think it's largely stayed within its comfort zone, that it was where it operated within the local health authorities. And you know, we're all grateful to that element over the last couple of years, because they were ideally placed to work with local authorities for delivering everything that we had through COVID. But as we come out of that scenario, perhaps that's an element that I don't think you covered within the survey, was whether or not we're doing enough to engage with those very highly trained, very motivated public health professionals that work within each local authority. So whether or not there's an element of work that we can get those to start pushing the politicians and the local health authorities, or that this is an element that we can actually get a good rate of return. You know, Kate, as much as anybody, can throw out the figures of the rate of return for road safety works. Well, we need to start getting others to push at different doors, perhaps to start saying, well, and perhaps unlocking funding initially. One hesitates to say from the NHS with what may be coming over the hill to flatten them, but it's small amounts of money deliver a significant benefit to the community, and if we can get those switched on to it, perhaps that will unlock an element. Same with our colleagues in the fire service. I can't believe what our colleagues in the fire service have actually repurposed some of their staff for around road safety works, and they should be commended with it. But again, perhaps we're not telling people enough about what the fire service are managing to do, and that then leads on to the post crash element of it. They're the people, along with the accident investigators, who actually go out and see the repercussions of people getting things wrong, and people always get things wrong. But I think there's two elements there, like I said, public health and possibly the post crash paramedics and the fire service, that I don't think we've lifted up their efforts on this so far.
I'd support that.
I want to dig into that a little bit more in just a moment, actually, Tony. The sort of the way in which we deliver co-benefits, not just identifying who the delivery agents are, but how we, might operate across different policy areas. But I just wanted to kind of dig in a little bit more on this kind of question of, I guess, the appeal that we have as a profession. I was chatting only earlier today with a very talented young professional in our sector, and my question to them was, do you see yourself becoming a safety specialist, or do you see yourself being more of a generalist, and some other options that were open to them? And you could see that there was a kind of, well, I can see that there's opportunities within safety, but it seems like it could potentially be a bit of a dead end. Sean's confessed to having done nearly 20 years. I've got 20 years under my belt next year. How do we get people in to see what we've seen and to see actually, there's a contribution that can be made here?
It didn't feel like a confession, Dan, but now you put it that way. I think the answer is in what you just said, the sort of the other agendas here. So for me, people want careers. If you want talented people, they want careers that have vision and make them feel, it's purpose and meaning and all that. And for me, the really critical thing about road safety in particular is its critical role in the sort of really, really, really big challenges of our time, i.e. climate change and the need to decarbonize transport and public health, right? So and those all meet at active travel and semi-active travel, and if we can basically fund road safety as part of those wider agendas, that's, I think, when you get the really exciting new people coming in with new ideas.
Yeah, I think the main thing is actually getting these young people, and the more I visit the universities with JBN, the more I'm amazed with the enthusiasm and the talent of these young people. But it's to actually get them involved in the highway sector. If they're not creamed off to the banking sector, which may be disappearing, but so we may actually retain some of our talented civil engineers who are comfortable with numbers. If we can get those into highways, I think that you'll find that the cream will rise up. One hopes the cream will rise up to the road safety opportunities. I'd caution against us wanting to try and target people into specific areas. I think it's better if we can get a younger element in, because I've now retired. My colleagues of all those years have all reaching retirement age, and the demographic of the industry is hugely swayed to one side. We need to get some of us old individuals moved up and out the way, and create a raft of jobs below that we can move these young people into, and they will then find their way, because we need to have a general understanding of safe system, and then you'll have specialist roles. But if we can get the general understanding embedded, then the specialist roles will be filled. There was never any shortage of people applying for the posts in road safety when I was in Avon and then subsequent local authorities. You know, people, if they're in the business, will apply for it. And you want people moving into road safety that have specialisms in the other part of highways to start off with, because they're going to take those skills and apply them to the road safety element. So I'd caution against us wanting to try and move people directly to it. Rather, I'd like us to be challenging the universities, one, to consider highways, which is a challenge in itself, but even those universities that are running highways courses to actually start considering the road safety elements upon it. And as Shaun said, as in the same way as they're considering the sustainability and the zero carbon element of it, they should be able to wrap the road safety element around that as well. Because if you can get an idea of somebody considering safe system for a highways, then they can apply those ideas to the built environment, to structures, to any number of techniques, once they get their idea around the fact that there are several different pillars that it rests upon, and that people make mistakes, everything that we've talked about up until now. But let's see if we can get the universities embedded in that, which, you know, IHE in its little way, CIHT are also members of JBM. We can start seeing if we can push universities on that.
I think there's two layers of interconnectedness we need to improve. We need brilliant people. You know, this is a brilliant opportunity. The Safe System Vision Zero is an extraordinary vision, you know, of achievement. And to get that brilliant achievement, we need brilliant people. The connectedness, even the first layer of connectedness is the people doing diverse things, and that's getting out of those silos. And we need structures that mean people win. So from the skills point of view, they have diverse training, they get a range of different opportunities, which mean they stay interested and they bring road safety benefits in each of those things they do, whether it's in a structures team working on vehicle restraint, whether it's in a road safety team doing ETP, whether it's in a highways team understanding departures. But the other bit of the interconnectedness is the whole mechanism of what good looks like, because now that half of all fatal and serious injuries are not people inside vehicles, they're pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, the people in the vehicles, which have kind of been our focus in many ways, are no longer that priority. And if we're seeing the total picture, we'll only get the total benefits if we price the total benefits. And at the minute, as I understand it, our economic model ignores journey time of pedestrians and cyclists, which I think is utterly immoral. So if you are a motorist driving, your time has a value. If you're walking and cycling, your time has no value. We ignore the mortality and morbidity benefits of active travel, which are immense, and we know what they are. They're quantified. World Health Organization, heat tool, it's all out there. But we ignore that. We let fixation on cyclist vulnerability to trauma make people think cycling is a thing to be feared. And yes, you can get traumatic injuries cycling, but you can in every other mode. But you're more likely to die from inactivity than you are from trauma doing activity. If we get the transport planning bit of the equation right, we'll not only get those extraordinary benefits, because we'll start monetizing the benefits we know are already there, but that then becomes a really fulfilling career for somebody to work in, rather than feeling like you don't have a control. You get the leadership, you get the vision from DFT and default assemblies right the way down to people in individual authorities and across all the disciplines. That becomes something we can really change. But it's a gigantic problem, and therefore it needs a gigantic solution, I think.
Well, that's certainly moved us into that conversation about co-benefits, and that breadth of policy goals that we're trying to deliver, and where they coalesce, and I guess where sort of the skills that we need within the sector can then coalesce. But where Kate's just sort of landed us is that's quite a big challenge. It's quite a structural challenge, and it's going to require some significant resource. Just interested in views from others on the panel about we attack that, because that's quite a different way of thinking about about how we approach the problem. And there's some of the silos that exist both within national government and local government, and indeed within the profession, sort of how we get that diversity of perspective that allows us to sort of deliver much more collaborative, coordinated responses that are much more integrated in their purpose and deliver a wider range of policy goals. I know that's not really the kind of where we're hoping to go fully with this conversation, but I'm just interested in views from others on the panel about.
I think some new technology may help us. You look to see what's coming out of IRAP around cycle wrap, around the VIDOR assessment tool, and that will help traditional engineers understand some of the concepts of the safe system and some of the good elements of design, and then you'd start overlaying the requirement to possibly carry out full IRAP surveys and star rating highways, etc., and that will start to push people along, akin to the targets that we were looking at in 2000. But it is a big ask, and I come back to the fact that it's going to need an element of the DFT and others, health, for example. Perhaps Biz has a part to play in this as well, pushing down on the problem and being coaxing people along with the odd carrot, but equally being wanting to come along with the odd hammer as well to start. And equally, one of the funding elements of one of the way we've funded schemes over the last 20 years is to reward people that have done works previously and have said, oh, you've done very well. Basically, you've spent all the money we gave you. We'd like you to spend some more, which doesn't acknowledge those that didn't bid first time, or those that aren't coming up to standard, those that have got low star ratings on their network. How do we bring those up? And the only way to bring those up is to actually say, you're not achieving it. Here are the techniques to achieve it. And perhaps, as I think James mentioned, is sharing resources from adjacent authorities. If an adjacent authority is achieving a 3-star on, let's be generous, 70% of his network, to the authority that's achieving 40%, then is there something that can be learned from them?
I was going to just chip in as well with the disparity of funding, really. So again, if you think of it at at the very top level, the work that Road Safety GB does with Think and the Think campaign. So that is our national road safety communication brand and channel for the whole of the country. And the budget there is low millions of pounds. Okay. And you compare that with what is put into infrastructure. There's a real benefit in trying to educate people about how to use new infrastructure, and it's got to go hand in hand. But I say at a top level, you can look at the work the Think campaign have to do, and one of the elements, for example, was communicating about changes to the highway code. And they're given a relatively small amount of money. Sounds a lot of money, doesn't it? When we're talking millions, it sounds a lot of money. But it is small when you are trying to have a far wide reach and trying to communicate that. So again, just putting that into context, and when you bring it back to a local level, local teams have very little money quite often, and sometimes hardly any money for campaign work and communication work. And that's a definite disparity there with that.
What would you think, James, if we also had a top slicing of budgets? If you're talking about, again, a multi-million-pound highway scheme that you want to operate within a safe system, if you had almost 1%, perhaps even less than that, is top sliced off to deal with training elements. So the first thing you do is train the people that have got to design and build and operate that network in safe systems, so that you don't start off running and start building it and hoping that when you get to the other end the two bits match up. You start off with the firm in the knowledge of what your footing is. Yeah, because as Dan's highlighted, the industry is saying we want to do this training. IHE, CIHT, any number of providers would be able to provide an element of that training. But it's not going to come about unless those local authorities, National Highways, have got the budget and they're moving forward with training. But if those local authorities haven't got the budgets to put those staff through some quite extensive training, you can either run it as individual days, which make up a suite of training, or you could run it as an academy, which runs up, a 4-day course with a break in the middle, which would have some coursework for candidates to go away and bring their own work into play on that one. Those are relatively expensive. I think you're looking £1,500, £1,800 per candidate, and that's not a lot of money over a highway scheme. But you know this as much as I do, James. You start saying that to local authorities, and they go, "But we've got £250 per person for training." You're going to use up 7 people's training, which rather misses the point, doesn't it? Because what this should be a start of a lifelong training for those people.
And
how we fund that.
Yeah, and a small percentage, Tony, could make a big difference, couldn't it?
Yeah.
So one of the things that came up in last week's discussion, I think it was Mark Kemp from Adept, talked about operating at a larger scale. So I think the point he was making was, we've got 200 and something highway authorities across the UK. As has already been discussed this afternoon, budgets have been impacted over the last 10 years or more. I think the point that Mark was making was actually, if you were to do things in combination at scale at the level that you get, with a sort of a TfL or Transport for the West Midlands, Transport for Greater Manchester, or other kind of combined authority areas, then actually can you bring together, the marketeers that Shaun was opining for earlier in our conversation? Can you bring together a quality and a depth of profession that you would just not be able to develop purely at the local level? And some of those things, like sort of training budgets that are commensurate with an authority that's managing a much wider network. I'm just interested in your views, sort of on whether actually there's something that we could do that would operate differently if we were operating at a different level of scale.
Yeah, I can chip straight in, Dan, on that, in that Road Safety GB is set up in 12 regions. And I know, for example, where small amounts of money might be pooled across a region. So in the East Midlands, for example, a motorcycle safety campaign called Shiny Side Up, is a long-standing, I think it's in its 20th year. And what it does is collect a small amount of money from those authorities that want to be part of it, and they're able to do more with that. So they're able to do things they wouldn't be able to achieve on their own. The key and the knack with it is about pooling that money and then using best practice to make sure what the money's being spent on is the right thing. And having all that enthusiasm, and when somebody's really excited about something, and you're working in that environment, it spurs you on, doesn't it? It spurs you on to try and deliver your best. So I'm a real fan of that, and there'll definitely be differences. We know that London could be completely different, say, from some rural locations, but it's about maybe trying to match your to your counterparts, perhaps, and then using those skills widely. And I bet the same's true in research, evaluation, engineering, right across.
Big certainly works. Coming from when I moved into highways, I moved into Avon County, which was the largest non-metropolitan council in Great Britain at the time. And as James has said, about the number of people that you could come across, you'd have floors of structural engineers, floors of highway engineers, and and within that structure of several hundred people, you could afford a road safety team of 8 people, and some of those people were doing the elements revolving around the police recording system and validating that. But that has a benefit as well, because you're looking across a huger area, so you can start picking out the elements which road safety audit is supposed to be founded in. So, you know, I think so often we think that big is bad, but sometimes big has a benefit, and whether or not that's done with sharing resources or whether or not it's done in the metropolitan areas, like we talked about West Midlands and we talked about Manchester, it would be interesting to see how they're going to approach safe systems. Certainly Manchester, because they're doing a lot of work around cycling and intermodal transport. It'd be interesting to see how they're going to approach safe system.
So I'm very conscious of the time, and I feel like certainly I could carry on this conversation for a good deal longer, but very aware that people have given up, you know, an hour of their time to be with us this afternoon. So I do promise that we will come in on time. And my second apology, therefore, is for those who've asked questions. I think most of the questions that have been asked have been somewhat addressed by the panel in the discussions that we've had. So I'm going to just jump to a sort of final question, really, last opportunity for each of you, really to sort of say what you think the imperative is for us next. What is it that we should be doing over the next, you know, sort of months or few years to really sort of embed and make a change over the next 15 to 20. I think we all acknowledge that, you know, it's going to take a long time to secure lasting change in this area. But are there some things that we should really attend to soon as a profession if we want to make some progress?
I can go very quickly. Change the public narrative around road safety and the safe system. Massively reduce speed limits with all the political fallout that imposes, and work out how all of these electric micro-mobility devices are going to affect all of this, because basically what they do is they put many more people traveling at higher speeds in less than forgiving environments, and that's going to be a big problem.
Right. Anyone want to add to Shaun's manifesto?
I'd add to that recognise that anyone who's ever worked in the private sector, you know, the answer to the question who's responsible for marketing is all of us. It's who's responsible for safety, all of us. And the recognition that every single person, from a structures designer to a servicing technician, has a role and is empowered to act on that role and has the knowledge to do that. And that we value benefits, and we view training and enabling staff as part of benefits. We don't think we can save on the cost of a bypass by not designing it. You know, the human desk-based bit of the tool is critical, without which the thing you do in the field has no value. So, or indeed actually make things worse. We've just won an award for work we've done on a route where we recognised that previously identified measures would not only have made road safety worse, they'd have made worker safety worse. People were tackling the wrong problem. They said, it's a bend, we need to tackle the bend. They weren't bend collisions, it happened to be junction collisions at a junction near the bend. People had solved the wrong problem, were making things worse. So understanding that careful deliberation about the task is where you get your value.
Right, thanks, Kate.
Yeah, I think it's a case of getting central government convinced of the argument. Perhaps the road investigation branch is going to have an element to play with that as well once they've had a couple of years under their belt, and they can start reporting back to central government, and also realising and convincing local authorities and new recruits that their education in highways and around safe systems as well starts from the day that they start their job, not after they've got their degree in engineering, but they start learning how to do the work and how to actually get things on street and operate them from the day they start, not from the end of their education. And that needs to be funded. and that needs to be funded well, and it needs to be funded often. That's why we push on with sort of continued professional development, and perhaps that's something central government has to look at as well, as what is an engineer and how they make sure that engineers achieve those CPD days.
Great, thanks, Tony. James?
And I suppose we all know eventually the push will come from government. We will have the national framework, and that's hopefully it's that stability and then that national vision that will drive that forward. If for whatever reason there's hurdles and gaps along the way, then I suppose it's for all of us as stakeholders and as others to come together and try and move it forward in another way and make it happen ourselves. If there isn't that will there to do that, but hopefully there will be.
Great, thank you. I just want to say a huge thank you to all on the panel, to Kate, to Shaun, to Tony, and to James, and to all of you who've joined us both this week and in the preceding weeks. If you have not caught the conversations from the last 2 weeks, they are available to watch on demand via the website. So please do go and catch up with those. In terms of next steps, I mean, we have shared the findings from this quite widely through these webinars. We have been sharing them with partners. We are also anticipating doing some sort of write-up in a kind of white paper or something, both the results of the survey and some of the most salient points from the discussions that we've had over these last 3 weeks as well, which we'll be putting out early next year. 2023 is the anticipated date for that. But thank you very much for joining us. I hope it has been sort of informative and helped to shape your thinking as well as it's shaping ours. And for now, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thanks all.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.